Yeah, we can start.
So I invite Mr. Alok Parthi to give the welcome address and introduce the subject. Mr. Parthi is the trustee of Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust. He did his post-graduation in physics from Allahabad University and also master's degree in social planning and policy from London School of Economics. He was in Indian Administrative Service and occupied various positions in Government of India. He was secretary in the Ministry of Coal. So, Mr. Parthi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Shambhan. First of all, let me welcome Shri B.K. Chaturvedi, who's been kind enough to be there for this webinar, as chairman of Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust. Mr. Bang, of course, has already spoken. Mr. Mehrotra and Dr. Pant and myself, we were three members of this committee that were responsible for organizing this and selecting the speakers. And I welcome both of them, Mr. Mehrotra and Mr. Pant. I also welcome all the speakers. They are very distinguished people who have worked extensively in the area of energy and various other participants. I think there are a large number of people who are attending this seminar. Well, the subject that we have picked on is sustainability through carbon markets. Well, going back to 2015 in the Paris Agreement, NDCs were set up for various nations. And it was there that it was decided how would we kind of move towards the net zero target. And rules, you could say, or some guidelines were also brought out. One of the methods that was talked about very elaborately was carbon markets as an interim measure of reaching the goal. The carbon markets essentially are putting some kind of a price to carbon dioxide, turning it into some kind of a commodity which can be sold or purchased. So we have basically in this system, basically we have carbon credits and you have carbon offsets. Carbon credits is something which any company can purchase and it's normally sold by governments, but trading can be done across companies, across nations. Offsets are probably the leftovers. If you are emitting certain amount of carbon dioxide and you reduce, then you have a certain offset, or you have purchased credits and you have not emitted the same amount of carbon dioxide, then there is an offset which can be traded. These are simple definitions which are there. But what happened in COP20 in Paris was, and I think if we can, there are experts here who probably elaborate. Clause 6 of the agreement gives out a few more details as to how this whole issue of carbon trading has to be carried out. I would not like to elaborate that very much, but what is now important, as we can see it, is that after the last COP, that is at Baku, I think rules have also been laid down as to how this is to be taken forward. We need to see how nations are going to react to this and how nations are going to work out this whole issue of carbon trading. India is also working on this. The ministries are working. There are certain guidelines, certain things have already been said. But I think we'd like to hear from the experts as to where we are and how this is going to work out for India, at least. Leave aside what happens the world over, but perhaps what happens in India and how this is going to be worked out. That is, we get some sense of the policy and some sense of the rules and regulations that will govern carbon trading. I would like to stop here because the subject is so wide and so important. I'm sure lots of people are there who wanted to listen and want to know what is happening in in the country with regard to carbon trading. Thank you very much. May I now request our chairman, Mr. B.K. Chaturvedi, to say a few words. Before that, I hand it back to Mr. Bang to give a brief introduction.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Alok Parti. I now invite Mr. B.K. Chaturvedi to address the audience. Mr. Chaturvedi is chairman of Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust. Mr. Chaturvedi is also a postgraduate in physics from Allahabad University and also studied public administration in UK. He joined Indian Administrative Service and occupied various positions in Government of India. And he rose to the highest level of Cabinet Secretary in the Government of India. He was also a member of the Planning Commission, and he was also awarded with Padma Bhushan by the President of India. And currently he is also chairman of the Delhi Public School Society. So Mr. Chaturvedi, please.
Well, thank you, Shyam, and thank you, Alok. First of all, let me welcome all the participants who are on the webinar, some of whom I can see and many others whom I cannot see. So my welcome to all the members. It's a great tribute that members feel so concerned about this issue of carbon trading and carbon credits. I had, as member energy, discussed this issue for a long, long time at international fora and at national fora. And subsequently, after the Paris Agreement and the recent Baku Agreement, which Alok mentioned, there have been developments on the concrete utilization of carbon credits at an international level. The basic question is that all of us are very concerned about countries to have some incentive to use their less carbon intensive technologies and save on carbons, have carbon efficiencies, have other methods of reducing their carbon dioxide emissions. And once they reduce their carbon dioxide emissions to earn carbon credits. So many countries today are concerned that they must reduce their emissions some or the other so as to make their air cleaner and so as to make this problem of 1.5 degree increase, which is in fact is getting increasingly difficult to a more solvable level. I noticed that we have some excellent speakers. I would like to say that once again, I was seeing the list, welcome all the speakers, and would be very keen to hear them on this issue. And thank you once again, and I once again welcome all the members and all the participants on behalf of the Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaturvedi. I now invite Dr. R.K. Malhotra to speak and set the context. Dr. Malhotra is a mechanical engineer from IIT BHU and then PhD from IIT Delhi. He was Director R&D at Indian Oil Corporation, and he was also Director General of Federation of Indian Petroleum Industry. Currently, he is the President of Hydrogen Association of India, and he's also trustee of Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust. So, Dr. Malhotra, please.
Thank you, Shyamji. A very good afternoon to all the participants in this webinar, which our Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust, headed by respected Shri Chaturvedi ji, is planned this on a very important topic, which is sustainable future through carbon markets. As all of us are aware that this planet is facing the problem of global warming, and everybody today is talking about, we are talking about energy transition, we are talking about sustainability and environmental protection in much serious manner. And most of the, this is in terms of the carbon emissions, which we are going to talk. Most of the countries have already, as you are aware, that have planned net zero emission targets annually. And India also has planned to reduce its carbon intensity by about 45% by 2030 with the 2005 as base. So that's a target, and countries' net zero target is 2070. But most of our companies, have planned much ahead of that. Some companies have planned 2035, some 2040, some 2047 to coincide with the 100 years of India's independence. And that is a good sign that although the country's national target is 2070, but we are planning to do it much ahead, while the global planning, European planning is about 2050. So all this we are doing, and talking about sustainability is through the renewables, which are being focused upon. Biofuels are also a way of reducing the carbon footprints. Green hydrogen, green ammonia, all this ultimately is an attempt to reduce the carbon emissions and to replace the conventional fuels with the negative emission fuels, which will help us in offsetting the carbon emissions. Now, all this perhaps is not going to be enough, as was mentioned earlier, that if we have to limit this global warming to 1.5 degrees C, which we are nearly reaching. So we have hardly any time to save this planet. So we have globally, people are working on how to check this through various mechanisms. There are offset approaches by buying credits, and there are about 75 countries which have already gone for carbon pricing mechanisms, which are there. And India in past has experience of CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, and PAT. In fact, I was looking at some data that India is the second largest number of projects registered under CDM. And the PAT scheme, which was implemented by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, has saved around 106 million tons of CO2 from 2015 to June 2024 this year. So all this is what has been done. And the markets of carbon operate through either compliance or voluntary. And there are some cases, there is carbon tax also involved. In future, how the compliance and offset markets will work is difficult to say, but there are people who are working on that. The compliances markets are mostly operated by the government, voluntary by the independent NGOs, etc. And India, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has come out with the Indian, is working on the Indian carbon markets plan, which is the carbon credit and training mechanism system has been planned. And I think Dr. Ashok Kumar from Bureau of Energy Efficiency will give us more details about that. So it's not for me to give more on that, but this scheme is going to be a game changer for India, where some of the industry will be forced to reduce the carbon emissions through the compliance and then platform, etc. Everything is being done. Regulatory framework is being put in place, institutional framework, etc. Everything is being done by BE, which will be listening from him. This program, as was mentioned, has been planned by us for knowledge sharing with all the industry partners or industry stakeholders. We have extremely distinguished speakers in our panel. First of them will be Mr. Rashmi, who is a distinguished fellow at TERI. And he has been in the past the senior special secretary in the Ministry of Environment. And he has excellent experience and I had the opportunity to listen to him in one of the programs 2 months earlier also, who has vast experience in this field. So I'm sure that when he will talk that how these evolving carbon markets can contribute to decarbonize the various industries, will be something interesting which we are looking forward to. We also have Mr. Roshan Lal, ED and CEO of Sugar Business from DCM Shriram Group. He's going to talk on carbon footprint reduction with the agricultural sector. In fact, the agricultural sector is something which is used for reducing the or offsetting the carbon. That is the area where people can earn carbon credits. So, but I think, I don't know whether the topic did also, he mentioned that he will talk about how to reduce the carbon footprint in the industrial sector also. So we are here because he's working in DCM Shriram Group, which, and he has got some experience around this field. So it would be interesting to listen to him. Then, of course, Dr. Ashok Kumar from the Deputy Director General in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. The Bureau of Energy Efficiency, all of us know that is evolving the entire carbon credit scheme in India and trading scheme. So this would be something which all of us will look forward to. So thanks, Dr. Ashok Kumar. You have kindly agreed. I know government and being in the government these days, you are very busy with the parliament session also on. Thank you very much for agreeing. And we have Ms. Agmani Ghosh, who is going to talk on carbon markets and growth. I had the opportunity to listen to him earlier also in one of the programs by S&P. So welcome. Will be interesting to. She's really an expert on all this market insights. She can talk about how the markets are growing and how the markets are developing. And then finally, we'll have Professor K.K. Pant, who will give his concluding remarks. Professor Pant is the director at IIT Roorkee, and vast experience on how to reduce how to decarbonize, how to do the biomass gasification, and how this various type of CO2 to chemicals, etc. I'm sure that with his concluding remarks, will definitely this program will get more inputs. So looking forward to some interesting program. Thanks to all the speakers once again who have agreed to be with us, and thanks to all the audience who have hooked up to this webinar. And I'm sure that all of us will stand to gain and learn something out of this. Thank you very much for joining. Over to Mr. Shyam.
Thank you, Dr. Malhotra. So that ends our inaugural session, and now we are starting with the technical session. And as already mentioned by Dr. Malhotra, the first speaker is Mr. R.R. Lakshmi. Just for the information of the participants, you can put your questions in the chat box, and at the end of the presentations by all the four speakers, if time permits, we will take those questions also and request the speakers if they can stay till the end of the technical session so that some of those questions can also be answered. The introduction of the speakers has already been given, but still Mr. R.R. Lakshmi is a distinguished fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI. He works on climate change policy and carbon market issues. Mr. Lakshmi was formerly an IS officer and held the position of Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And he was India's key climate negotiator for several years and was involved in the policy making. He's member of the National Steering Committee on Carbon Markets. So I now invite Mr. Rashmi to make his presentation.
Thank you, Bang Sahab, and good afternoon, and my greetings to all the distinguished people who are present here, my seniors and the trustees of the trust. Thank you for, first of all, for giving me this opportunity. Carbon market is an interesting subject. It has caught attention of the policymakers in the field of climate policy making. In the last about 10-15 years, India is not new to carbon markets. We have experimented with carbon markets under the Kyoto regime. So I'll leave the domestic policy part to Ashok, who is actually engaged with this subject. But I'll give you a sense of what is happening at the international level in terms of the evolution of the carbon markets and what are the policy issues involved there for a country like India, and what are the constraints which, or the other dimensions. which are associated with the development of the carbon market. Let me share a few slides to keep our thoughts focused on this. I hope you can see the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, after the Paris Agreement, and even before the Paris Agreement, if you look at this, the carbon markets have always been an integral part of the climate policy making and climate obligations of countries. The obligations did not devolve on the developing countries in the pre-Paris arrangement. Under the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol, it was only the developed countries which had these mandated obligations to reduce emissions. So carbon markets have existed since then, but the nature of the carbon markets is now changing after the Paris Agreement. And if you look at the present scenario, there are almost 64 countries which have different kinds of instruments relating to carbon market in place. Not all of them are traded internationally. All of these carbon instruments or the carbon policies do use carbon credits in different forms, but all of them are not traded. I must qualify there, because they are essentially used in the domestic sphere. Only a certain part of that is traded internationally, which is of relevance to countries like India. And after the Paris Agreement, one driver of these carbon credits is, of course, the commitments or obligations to reduce emissions. But the second driver is also the corporate commitments, the voluntary commitments of corporate, the major multinational companies like Shell or Microsoft or such companies, which also have voluntary commitments to reduce emissions without any mandated norm. So both of these are driving the carbon market internationally. And currently, there are almost 10% of the global emissions are covered by different kinds of carbon instruments. The totally in a year, the entire world is emitting about 52 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. So about 10% of that, which is about 20% of that, which is about 11 or 12 tons, gigatons, is covered by these carbon markets. Now, what does a carbon market do, and why is it of interest to us? A carbon market essentially places a price on the carbon, and this can take several forms: direct pricing or indirect pricing. Now, there are three ways in which the price of the carbon can be determined directly: either through a carbon tax, where the governments specify a certain amount of price, which is levied across the sectors. Second is cap and trade, where the government fixes a certain level of emissions for a particular sector or the economy as a whole, and then allows the industrial units to sell or purchase the carbon credits subject to the allowances which are allocated to them. So that's called cap and trade system. But this also determines a price for the carbon in an indirect manner, rather, or because the market discovers the price. The government doesn't fix the price. The government fixes the price in the case of carbon tax. But in the case of cap and trade, it is the market which fixes the price. The third form is the carbon crediting, where there is no allowance, but compared to a baseline, any reduction can be sold and purchased. And this is what is happening in the pre-Paris arrangements under the Kyoto regime. This is how it was done. It was basically a carbon credit with reference to a baseline. So these are the three forms in which the carbon credits can be generated and a value or a price can be placed on the carbon credits. But there are other indirect ways also in which the carbon can be priced. For example, fuel tax. When today we have a very substantial amount of excise duty on the fuels. So these fuels have carbon content. So we are actually putting a price on the use of carbon implicit in these fuels, but we are not directly relating it to the carbon content. So that's why it's an indirect price. But there are other instruments like this which are in place already. But for our purposes today, we will not be talking about indirect pricing. we will be talking about direct pricing methods, and more so the cap and trade system, because out of the 64 instruments that I have talked about, the largest number of instruments or forms of carbon pricing is through cap and trade system. So this is what concerns us. And these carbon credits in the either in form of baseline credits or through cap and trade, they can either meet regulatory requirement or they can meet voluntary requirement, depending on where the demand is coming from. We are not new. I mean, the question is, how is India going to place itself in the emerging markets? We have to learn our lessons from what we did in the past. In the past, we participated very actively in the Kyoto markets. And then the primary instrument for the Kyoto, under the Kyoto regime for developing countries was this.
Yeah, Hari.
So we were a very large player there. In fact, I'll give you a slide here which will give you the extent of our participation in the CDM. Almost 12% of the global CERs that were generated at that time came from India. And out of the total number of projects registered under the CDM, under the Kyoto regime, almost 17% came from India. But we had a very large share. Unfortunately, Kyoto markets suffered badly because of certain restrictions placed by the European Union in the aftermath of certain complaints regarding the environmental integrity of the credits, and they practically stopped trading or allowing offsets to be purchased from Asian countries like India, China, and certain other countries. So although we had a very large share and presence in the global carbon markets through CDM, and our industry is well conversant with the techniques of the global carbon markets, how a baseline is set, how the verification is conducted, how validation is done. This experience lies with our industry when we were participating in the CDM. So this experience can be revived easily when our domestic carbon market rolls out. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we had a very large presence in the international global carbon markets, but we could not carry it forward because of certain global developments. I'll come to that shortly. There are certain lessons to be learned. The primary lessons are that the complaints regarding environmental integrity, which led to the collapse of the CDM, must be addressed in the future markets that we are going to evolve. And the corporates must play an active role. And of course, the government needs to come up with a clear, transparent, and stable policy regarding authorization of the credits, regarding the rules which will govern the generation of these credits, how the projects will be established, how the projects will be approved, and which sectors will be covered. So we need to have a clear policy about this. So integrity question, the question of stable policy, and the question of involvement of the corporates in setting up these projects is extremely important, and the Kyoto experience is a pointer to this. Now, the new markets that are coming up under Paris Agreement are slightly different from the Kyoto regime. Under the Kyoto regime, the targets were top down. The global targets were laid down by the international community. And that was one of the reasons why the Kyoto Protocol actually came to an end, because the United States, which was the largest emitter at that point of time, refused to participate while other developing countries did not have any targets. So the Kyoto regime was put in place, but US was not participating in this. So the market declined over a period of time. Compared with the Kyoto regime, Paris Agreement is based on bottom-up targets. There are no top-down targets laid down by the international community here. The targets are laid down by the country concerned itself. India, for example, has its own NDC, and we have laid down our own target of emissions intensity reduction. So that is the framework within which our domestic carbon market will function. It is not the targets laid down with the global community, the international community. For example, we have a global goal of 1.5 degree, but 1.5 degree goal does not lay down any specific emission reduction target at the global level. That is left to the countries concerned. We have devised our own goals and targets, and our carbon market will function within that framework at the domestic level. Now, the new carbon markets which are going to come up under the Paris Agreement are in two parts. One is at the government to government level. The trading of these carbon credits can take place at the government to government level, which is called Article 6.2 trading. The second part is at project level, which is almost a successor of the CDM, where the credits are going to be traded at the project level between the industrial units. But I must mention here that this trading is subject to something called corresponding adjustment and host country authorization. These are two very important criteria here. What corresponding adjustment means that no credit which is used once can be used twice. In the host country, if a country authorizes the credit to be used by another country or an industrial unit located in another country, then it has to deduct that credit from its own inventory. So it basically a transfer of a credit from the host country involves deduction of that credit from the inventory of the host country and addition of that credit to the inventory of the purchasing country or to the purchasing industrial unit. This involves something called host country authorization. Unless this authorization is in place, this kind of trading cannot take place. This market was actually in limbo for at least 4 to 5 years because the rules were not in place. The basic problem in approval of the rules was that under 6.2, the international registry and the modalities for registering these credits and creating an account of these credits was not fully in place. Now there is an agreement on how this international registry will be created to keep an account of the credits traded between the governments. And at the project level, the problem was environmental integrity, the standards. That has also now been agreed. The standards will be laid down by a supervisory body of the UNFCCC. So some movement has now taken place, at least as far as the rules are concerned. They have now been approved. Now it is left to the host country governments to set up the authorization procedures so that the trading of the generation of these credits, recognition of these credits in the registry, accounting and trading can take place. In fact, many countries are already, they have entered into bilateral arrangements, although formal trading has not started, but 42 pilots in 10 buyer countries from 46 selling countries have already been established. Japan, for example, is leading in this. Their what is called joint crediting mechanism, they are leading with this, and they have got into almost 238 bilateral arrangements for sale and purchase of such credits at the international level. This is what is called compliance markets, where the markets and the targets are laid down by the governments. The targets, once they are laid down by the countries concerned, there will be a certain level of trading which will take place because of the regulation. But along with the regulated markets, there is also a voluntary market which has been functioning all along since the Kyoto days. But the compliance market are obviously larger because the compliance market in developed countries, for example, it covers almost all the sectors. So all the credits, all the economic sectors will have to use these carbon credits. So therefore, the compliance credits, their volume is much larger compared to the voluntary credits, which are traded between industrial units purely because of a voluntary corporate demand. So compliance market will always be larger in size compared to voluntary market. However, the voluntary market is growing, and that is what actually interests most of the industrial units, both in our country as well as abroad. They basically look at the offsets, because reducing the emissions involves not only technology but investments, and industries, for most of the industries, this is not the first choice. The first choice is always the offsets. So the voluntary carbon market always plays a very important role in the initial phase. And this is also going to happen in India. So the industry is looking at the voluntary carbon market with great deal of interest. Whether it will grow or whether it will get constrained because of the authorization procedures which are implicit under the rules approved under the Paris Agreement. That is the question which most of the people are asking. But my own sense is that the voluntary carbon markets are not likely to be affected by the rules that have been approved, because the corporates also have now more or less adopted the net zero goal as their voluntary goal everywhere across the world. And the corporate demand for such voluntary credits will also grow in future. As you can see, from 2010 onwards to 2020, it has grown multiple times. Almost 95 million tons of CO2 are being traded globally in the voluntary market. Of course, the compliance market remains large, and it will continue to be larger in size compared to the voluntary demand. But nonetheless, both of these segments of the market are likely to grow because of the net zero goal and the corporate commitment about net zero. But there is a problem here in the voluntary market, which deals mainly with offsets. There are complaints about greenwashing, that most of the industries are essentially trying to pass on the responsibility to others rather than reducing emissions themselves. So this is the biggest complaint voiced against the use of offsets by industries. And then there are genuine problems here. So we need to settle this issue, so both on the demand side as well as on the supply side. So some efforts are being made. On the demand side, for example, there is a voluntary carbon market integrity initiative, which has proposed a code of practice, which the corporates must follow when they decide how much to offset and how much to reduce themselves. So there should be a certain code. The industrial units which are in those sectors where it is easy to reduce emissions, they should not simply pass on their responsibility to others. So that is the basic principle here on the demand side. On the supply side, there are issues about the integrity, that the baselines are not good, the additionality considerations have not been followed. So all those integrity concerns need to be addressed. And again, an integrity council for voluntary carbon market has been set up, which is in the business of setting standards for such credits which are verified and validated by the international programs. There are international programs like ACR, Vera, Gold Standard. They are in the business of approving such credits and selling and purchasing these credits in the voluntary market. So there is now an effort that both on the demand side and on the supply side, these credits should go through a process of integrity, validation, and there should be a code of practice for the corporates to follow offsets or follow emission reduction policies. There are other global developments which are compelling governments and the private sector to move in this direction. For example, the border adjustment, CBAM, which is going to be imposed by the European Union. The ICAO has already started implementing the CORSIA scheme for emission reduction in the international aviation sector. IMO is planning a similar scheme, some kind of a tax or carbon limitation for international shipping. The Financial Stability Board has set up a task force on climate-related financial disclosures, which lays down the standards for ESG in companies. for their disclosures. And so there are many other similar voluntary standards for ESG across the world. So all of these developments are a clear pointer that both the compliance market as well as the voluntary market will grow in future. India is, of course, because of these developments and also because of its own emission intensity targets, is moving towards setting up domestic carbon trading scheme, which you will get to know soon. The implication here is that so far we have not had a carbon pricing, mainly because the emission intensity reduction goal for 2030 does not envisage any such thing. But now that we have a net zero goal for 2070, we will have to come up with sectoral roadmaps for net zero. And these sectoral roadmaps are bound to involve some kind of a regulatory framework for carbon emissions. And one of the possible ways of regulating carbon emissions, as I have just mentioned, there is something called carbon pricing, which can take three different forms. Obviously, the larger body of economists in the country are not in favor of carbon tax at the moment, a uniform carbon tax, but there is a possibility of a cap and trade. And that is what the domestic credit scheme might think about. As I mentioned, one of the issues which India will have to grapple with when it decides to deal with international carbon credits is its policy about authorization of the credits. The Government of India has identified 14 sectors where credits can be sold in the international market, but there is still no clarity about how and to what extent the authorization will be allowed, because there is a feeling that our own inventory should not suffer if we allow authorization of the credits to be traded internationally. We should not fall short of emission credits ourselves. This is something which needs to be debated. My own sense is that I think we should be a little liberal here, because till 2030, there is every possibility that we will fully meet our emission intensity reduction goals. Beyond 2030, one doesn't know. India's economy is yet to peak. And then in the rising phase of our emissions, we will still have some surplus emissions, which we can afford to sell to the international community, either in the compliance market or in the offset market. But it is a decision which the policymakers have to take. So the last slide, the future prospects. My sense is that both of these markets are going to grow, and the signals have already started appearing in form of increase in the carbon prices globally. In the wake of the collapse of the CDM and the conclusion of the Kyoto regime, the prices had plummeted to almost $2 to $5 a ton, which have now they have risen to 30 per ton. On average, in some countries, even it is more than 30. So globally, the carbon prices have begun to rise. And obviously, the one possible reason is that the Paris Agreement obligations are now going to be implemented soon, and the rules are in place. Decks have been cleared for the implementation of both the government-to-government trading and the industry-to-industry trading. And India has, since it has already been it has a large body of experience in this sector, it should take advantage of that experience and promote liberalization of its rules for participation in the international markets. So let me stop here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
I suggest we take the questions at the end. We have requested the participants to put their questions in the chat box or in the QA box, and there are some questions in the QA box which probably you can look at them. And I request the participants to put the name of the speaker whom they are addressing the question, so the speaker can. I would like to thank Mr. Rashmi for excellent presentation. And we will now proceed with the next presentation from Mr. Roshan Lal. So having heard the policy matter from Mr. Rashmi, let's hear how the industry is dealing with the subject. So Roshan Lal is the Executive Director and CEO of the Sugar and Ethanol business of DCM Shriram, and he's recognized for his leadership and contribution in the growth of sugar industry. He has received an award for the best CEO of the year in the sugar industry. So he will share his experience about the practices adopted by the industry to reduce the carbon footprint. Mr. Roshan Lal, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for giving this opportunity for sharing my views. And on this very, yes, on this very important topic, I have prepared a couple of slides, 2-3 slides, just to give a structure to the whole discussion. So, as expected, I'm supposed to cover agriculture and industry part, because we are in sugar sector. So I shall certainly like to share my views that how we can contribute to the objective of decarbonization as a sector, both in agricultural aspects and manufacturing aspects. Also, I shall like to cover that what kind of products industry, sugar industry in particular, is producing, and how these are helping in the decarbonization journey. So as we all know that in agriculture side, these are the areas from where this carbon emission is there, right from use of agriculture machinery, because most of our machinery is run on diesel. There is a lot of carbon emission. Similarly, burning crop residues, which you all experience, particularly in NCR, and this is a prevalent practice in many parts of the country, due to which a lot of carbon emission is there. Of course, conversion of land and deforestation is a contributory factor. And because fertilizer is a vital input in agriculture production, so mostly the chemical fertilizers are in common use. Therefore, both from soil contamination point of view and also from carbon emission point of view, there is a lot of contamination due to chemical fertilizer, because its fertilizer use efficiency is on lower side due to our application method. Same way, manure management also, particularly anaerobic decay, is also a contributory factor. Coming to manufacturing operations, because in manufacturing operations we deal with energy, and we use coal also in many of the plants, but not in sugar sector. But fuel uses per se, there is a lot of emission, and carbon dioxide also is emitted in the process. Mining operations also, and these coal-powered power plants are a major contributor as far as carbon emission is concerned. Similarly, waste management is an issue to be tackled. And above all, in mobility sector, particularly in automobile sector, this is the main source of carbon emission, and which needs to be tackled. Next. So in sugar sector,
slide is not moving, sir.
It is, sir. It will take a second.
has it come?
No,
Has
sir.
it-
Not yet.
Not yet. What is the problem? Just a minute.
It has come now.
Okay.
So it has gone to third straight away. The 2 is not come.
2 has not come. This was not there.
This is 2 now. It's okay.
It's okay. So this I have covered. I am just coming to this. Whether it
Okay.
is
Okay.
fine. So let me cover one by one. Just to give a perspective of Indian sugar sector to the audience. sugar sector is the biggest sector in food processing in organized sector in India, in agriculture side. There's about 5 crore families are dependent on, and their sugarcane growers and their families are dependent on sugarcane cultivation in India. There are about 550 sugar mills. We produce about 32 to 33 million ton of sugar. And besides sugar production, now about, as you must be reading in the newspapers, that about 15% blending of ethanol is there in petrol. About 50% the contribution to this ethanol production comes from sugar sector. And also sugar sector is a major clean and green power producer. Approximately 7,500 megawatt power is produced by sugar plants, which is exported to these companies, government companies. So from clean energy point of view, clean fuel point of view, and of course that sugar production point of view, this sector is very, very important. And more so because it is directly integrated with the rural communities, and the engagement with sugarcane growers is seamless in case of sugar sector. So therefore, it is not exaggeration if I say that sugar sector is a catalyst to the rural economy of India in most of the part in the sugarcane growing areas at least. So from that perspective, because seamless engagement is there and we are directly involved with the sugarcane growers in propagating the good agronomic practices. So therefore, we can play a very, very effective role in changing the practices, in changing the culture, and in adoption of good agriculture practices. Like, for example, I shall name a few, like spraying, drone spraying. In many of the sugar factories in Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh, this practice has already started in a big way. We ourselves at DCM Shriram last year used about 25 drones. And in total, about 80,000 hectare area was sprayed through foliar spray. And the benefit of foliar spray is less fertilizer consumption, less water consumption, and fertilizer use efficiency is high, and cost is almost same or slightly lower. So this is quite a gainful proposition from overall standpoint. Secondly, trash mulching. As you know, other crops like, for example, paddy particularly, there is a lot of issue of the stubble burning. But in sugarcane sector, we have adopted this practice of trash mulching. And in trash mulching, it helps in many ways. It reduces water requirement of the crop. At least scientific study has demonstrated that it has saved 2 irrigation in the complete life cycle of the crop. Also, it adds to the organic carbon of the soil, and because it is brought back into the soil. So on long-term basis, the soil health is also improved. Third is composting. Composting, in the sugar manufacturing process, we produce press mud, which are the impurities along with sugarcane juice. So those press mud, those impurities are practically manures, and that press mud is being used as compost, and it is widely used by sugarcane growers in their crop. Same way, drip irrigation, like sugar sector in 2 states, in Uttar Pradesh and in Karnataka also, they have tied up with the Water Resources Group, which is an arm of International Finance Company, IFC, World Bank Group, and also with state governments, just to promote a drip irrigation in a big way. As we all know that macro irrigation does help in water use efficiency as well as improving the productivity of the crop. But this program is also being implemented in a structured way, and sugar industry is uniquely placed to implement it that way. Same way, and I must compliment here Government of India for initiating very good schemes like Kusum Yojana for solar pumps. This is gaining a lot of traction among the sugarcane growers. And sugar factories are also hand-holding the growers in getting these solar pumps. This is really a wonderful scheme, and it is highly subsidized by the government. On long-term basis, it's very quite useful because practically there is no operating cost. Only initial cost is there, and these solar pumps are getting traction. Same way in many states, this electrified irrigation, because diesel pumps, first of all, it is diesel, which is highly polluting, and secondly, the pumps being used are highly inefficient. So there is a double whammy, you can say. Therefore, this electrified irrigation is also being promoted by various states, and sugar factories are actively undertaking this initiative to help their farmers. So basically, all these I have already covered. So essentially, all these initiatives in agriculture side particularly are helping in carbon reduction and in organic carbon content improvement in the soil, and also raising the productivity of the crop, besides saving of water, which is a scarce natural resource. So this is certainly helping. And at association level also, at industry level also, what we have taken up with the government, because the engagement with the growers is very close and continuous, and we are responsible for 100% procurement of their produce. Therefore, we are better placed to act as a nodal agency for implementation of all the government initiatives and schemes all across the country. And because these are wonderful schemes, but how can we help the beneficiaries? How can we identify the beneficiaries? How can we organize them? How can we mobilize them? How can we help them in uploading the application on computer? So all this help is being extended by sugar factories in many parts of the country, and that is helping in a big way. Second aspect comes of manufacturing operations. Manufacturing operations, there are quite a couple of in the manufacturing process, a lot of carbon emission is there. But now, particularly, I shall give the perspective of sugar sector and ethanol sector, which is the main sector of sugar now. So we are capturing carbon, CO2. We are capturing that and making it a marketable product. In most of the distillation plants in the country, that CO2 is being captured, it is being bottled, and it is being sold. So that is one part which is already in practice, and most of the companies are doing this. Secondly, for converting CO2 into methanol, that is, those experiments are also going on, and its commercial viability is being worked out. Right now, there is no project per se, but I'm quite sure that in many parts of the world, it is being done, and it can be done here as well. So that is the second aspect which can be done. And besides methanol, also hydrogen. Hydrogen is also being green hydrogen. So hydrogen is also being explored as an alternative. Already the experiments are going on with a reputed institute along with the industry association. So that is also being explored. So basically, what I mean to say that CO2 is not a waste, rather it is being arrested and it is being converted into a useful, marketable product, clean fuel. So that is the endeavor which industry is trying to do, and it has gained some success as well. Same way as far as effluent are concerned, because sugar industry is a very classical example of circular economy. Like, just to mention a very specific case, and it is very heartening to share with you, that we produce ash out of distillery boiler. That ash we at DCM Shriram Limited, we have set up a plant of producing potassium sulfate which is international quality potassium sulfate from distillery ash, boiler distillery ash. This is the first plant of its kind globally. So I mean to say that every product is valuable over here, and waste to wealth concept is exactly being implemented in sugar sector. Most of the factories have set up the potash-based nutrient PDM, we call it PDM minerals. So those distillery boiler ash is being converted into potash-based nutrients. So that it is also a marketable product, and it reduces the dependence on imported fertilizer, which is the need of the hour for a country like India. Most of the potash is being imported from other countries. So that is also being done, and it is being done on good scale. Another area which is very, very important is this ethanol. You must have heard that in 1718, hardly 1 to 2% ethanol blending was there. But within a shorter span of time, within this 7-8 years, country has achieved about 15% blending. For a country like India and the magnitude of a country like us, 15% is a marvelous achievement in a very short span. Without doubt, it has come with the help of supportive policy framework of Government of India. Government of India has given its incentive for setting up the plants and ensured offtake of ethanol, but this has helped a big way in various ways, whether it is payment to the sugarcane growers, or it is decarbonization, or it is reducing dependence on imports, saving foreign exchange, and also industrialization and employment generation all across the country. So this is a very big program and very successful program, we can say, by any standard. Now, besides, what beyond ethanol? And after ethanol, then SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel is the next step, logical step. And as the globe is moving towards sustainable aviation fuel, so ethanol will be the main contributor in producing sustainable aviation fuel. So this is the next logical step, and industry is working on this particular aspect as well. Methanol I have covered, and this one, hydrogen also I have partly covered. Now experiments are going on that how can we produce green hydrogen. Now coming to another interesting area. Interesting area is this CBG, compressed biogas. Compressed biogas, because as I mentioned previously that we produce press mud in our sugar manufacturing process. And that press mud is a homogeneous feedstock for producing compressed biogas. And Government of India has launched one initiative, it's called SATAT program, Sustainable Alternative Towards Affordable Transportation. Government aims to set up 5,000 plants, CBG plants all across the country. Sugar industry will be obviously the first one to implement this initiative, because we have the feedstock readily available with us. Because in case of biomass, it's very difficult for the project proponent to arrange, to aggregate feedstock. So that is the main constraint. But in case of sugar sector, there is no constraint per se. So secondly, the CBG plant, because these are integrated plant with the sugar sector, sugar industry. So therefore, we have the catchment area of our factories, and we have sugarcane growers. So the manure produced out of compressed biogas can also be sold to our sugarcane growers. And again, it will be beneficial for sugarcane growers also, because their soil health will be improved and their productivity will be enhanced. So this particular initiative will go a long way, and I'm quite optimistic that this will go ethanol way. Because more than 500 plants are there, sugar plants are there, and these plants can be set up very easily. It is not a very costly affair, and the whole system is synergetic. The ecosystem is already there, and it can be very well implemented. And the benefits of this type of alternate fuel are quite clear, as I mentioned on this slide. Like every 1 ton CBG produced can reduce 500 tons of emission annually. This is huge in comparison to fossil fuel. Therefore, many automobile companies are producing CNG enabled vehicles. And another main benefit with sugar industry is because a lot of tractors are there in the catchment area of the sugar factories. Those tractors which are being run on diesel as of now can operate on CNG. So this will be a win-win situation for sugarcane growers because their cost of running will reduce, and also the pollution will also come down. So that is also one great advantage. And it will also improve the overall economic activities in the area due to multiple initiatives. So this is another big initiative which industry is well poised to take, and it is already taking up. At DCM Shriram Limited, we have also set in the process of setting up one plant which will be commissioned by January 2025. So these are few initiatives. And secondly, this besides CBG, potash I have already covered. So every product of sugar factory or byproduct of sugar factory can be used effectively to make a marketable product. Same way like we produce this effluent. We call effluent slope, we call it. But that also this is also potash rich. Experiments are going on that how can we extract potash out of this slope produced out of distillery effluent, and that will also be helpful in producing potash-based fertilizer. So these are the few examples where sugar industry is actively contributing as on date also, and in the times to come, industry is well poised to work in these areas more, and certainly these will be beneficial for environmental sustainability also and economic viability as well. Besides this, there are 3 more areas where industry is already working, and some of the players have already started working. Plastic is a big nuisance for all of us. And this bioplastic, already one plant is being set up by a major sugar group. So the work has already started over here. And this plastic will be biodegradable. So that is the beauty of this thing. So this will also pave the way for bioeconomy. And so much this can be produced out of sugar also, out of bagasse also. So this can be very well used. This particular initiative will also open so many avenues for the sector, and this plastic, which is a big issue for all of us, this problem will also be resolved through this route. Same way, biochemicals. Biochemicals also is another area. By various processes, we can produce biochemicals out of many feedstock, whether it is sugar or it is bagasse. So this area is being explored already at global level. So many reputed companies, so many big corporates are there in this space already, and very prominent names. It is a question of selection of the right technology, making it cost effective in Indian conditions, and just ensuring the market. So the basic essentials of any business are to be studied diligently and it's a question of implementation. So in nutshell, what I mean to say that sugar industry is now poised to leverage bioeconomy in a big way, and it is becoming beneficial for all the stakeholders, and also it is helping us in decarbonization process. Now the question comes that how can we do that, and how can we achieve that? As we have, as I have touched previously, that this ethanol blending program, why it was successful? Because of the supportive policy framework of the Government of India. Basic reason, because right kind of policies, offtake surety, incentive to set up the plants, and also then the rate remunerative prices. So everything was well thought, and besides that, directions to automobile companies just to prepare their cars for consumption. So everything was well thought, and there are numerous examples all across the world, like Brazil is a clear example where it has been achieved very, very successfully. So what Brazil achieved in many decades, 4 or 5 decades, India achieved that in 1 decade. But we should not rest here. We should move forward. And now Government of India has entrusted the job to Niti Aayog to prepone that. Previously, the target of 20% blending was by 2030, but now it has been preponed by 2025, which is a welcome step. So from that angle, in supportive policy framework is absolutely vital. And as the previous speaker was touching upon the policies, the carbon market, so that subject has already been covered by previous speakers and will be covered by other speakers as well. So I am not covering that, but that is the fundamental. Therefore, it is, I have written here, supportive policy framework is very, very fundamental to achieve this objective. But what we can do as industry, as responsible think tank organization or civil society organization, or of organizations like Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So multiple agencies are there. So what can we do? So first and foremost is awareness. Awareness is the first step which will lead to action. Rather before that, awareness and appreciation. First is awareness, then is appreciation, and third is action. So awareness is must, that how can we reduce the carbon footprints? How can we adopt sustainable practices is vital. How can we educate all the stakeholders so that people are more aware and their choices are very, very clear in this direction, and they can take definitive actions in this regard. Second is collaboration. Collaboration increases strength, and it enables you to leverage the skill, the expertise of others. So an active collaboration with all the stakeholders, whether it is government or academia or industry or any research organization. So we have to collaborate very actively, and partnership is the key. We will have to develop partnerships, because this is the only way to catalyze the whole process. So partnership are must, and collaboration is absolutely vital. Third action is innovation. Innovation, because this is an evolving space, lot of technology, as I covered in my previous slide, like in sugar sector. 5 years before or 7 years before, we were not able to even think of those areas. Every day there is a lot of positive change because of circumstantial pressure, because of the emerging trends, consumer behavior, and commitments of corporates and commitments of government at global level, at national level. So there is a lot of change all across. So in view of the changes, obviously we have to innovate to develop new product, new technology, so that we can build up the affordable technology. We can develop affordable technology, affordable solutions, marketable solutions, and marketable products, so that these are commercially viable products and sustainable products, and there is no hindrance in developing these products on large scale basis. So that innovation is absolutely required, and for that also that framework should be in place, so that the journey is continuous and we continuously progress in this regard. So I stop here. I can take some questions also for 5 minutes, but in nutshell, my take on this whole subject is that industry, as a responsible partner in this, responsible player in this process of decarbonization, can play a very, very vital role, and particularly for an industry like sugar, where agriculture interface is also there, industry interface is also there, and consumer interface is also there. So from that perspective, such industry can play a pivotal role in decarbonization initiative. With these words, I shall like to thank you very much, and if there are any questions, so I can take that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roshan Lal. As I said earlier, we have the questions in the QA box, and I would request the speakers to please be around till we complete this technical session. We have 2 more presentations to do, and then we can have question answer. And in the meantime, you can see the questions in the QA box and then keep your answers ready. So thank you very much. And now I invite Mr. Ashok Kumar, Dr. Ashok Kumar. Dr. Ashok Kumar is BTech and MTech from IIT Delhi and PhD from the University of Delaware, USA, in energy and environmental policy with specialization in energy economics, energy and sustainability, sustainable development. He worked with Energy Coordinating Agency in Philadelphia. He's presently working as Deputy Director General of Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power, Government of India, and he leads the implementation of National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency. So Dr. Ashok Kumar, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I am just, I hope is my slide visible?
Yes.
Thank you. Now I full screen. Yeah. First of all, thank you.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation, and distinguished dignitaries and delegates. I think I am following where Shri Rashmi sir has left. So I have smaller space to cover. So I would focus more on the Indian context. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm coming with 2 kind of a little bad news that the 1.5 degrees centigrade, many say that this has already been breached. And also, it is also said that 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries have also been breached. So we are in a very precarious situation, to be sincere and honest, to recognize the situation. So I think the interventions of mitigation and the markets are kind of driving towards the possibility of arresting this temperature rise and then addressing the larger issue of global climate change. So I think the distinguished audience here very well know why this market and the deliberation previous that has gone into has brought all these clear that the market is needed, particularly after framing of the Paris Agreement, to meet the challenge of the global climate change, that carbon market monetization of the carbon has to happen so that we can respond to the measures to the scale and speed that is needed to address the climate change. So that is, for India also, these are the needs that is being pressing for establishing a carbon market. So, and also to facilitate some investment in cleaner technologies, and also possibility of collaboration with national, international bodies where we can reduce or kind of mitigate possible emission reduction in the times to come. So that is where the carbon markets, and I think landscaping of the carbon market has also been done by Rashmi sir. So just for the sake of repetition, the carbon market space is kind of spread in two broad areas. One is the compliance, another is the voluntary. And in the compliance market, we would see some kind of a mandatory regimes like emission trading schemes like EU, Korea, China, and carbon tax in places like Canada, energy tax to a certain extent in India, where the coal cess is a kind of energy tax that is imposed. And then the voluntary offset market all over, in different forms and shapes. And we had CDM, then voluntary markets existing, and the past that has been playing in. So the carbon pricing instruments are broadly in three categories. One is a typical, you can say, mandatory taxing or mandatory penalty to say that you are taxed, your predetermined pricing is fixed. And another category is a mix of reward and penalty, where the mechanisms like emission trading systems fit in. And the other one is the voluntary mechanism, where you have rewards, but not the penalty. Any compliance requirement is not there. So again, this has also been highlighted that India is not new to the utilization of carbon pricing instruments to some extent. In very purest form, the CDM projects, they were very carbon related instruments. And then somewhat indirectly, indirect or some modified form of carbon pricing are the PAT scheme, where energy certificates were used, which can be kind of converted or extended to the carbon. And if you see, the renewable energy certificates have also been there as a market instrument in India. And these are the numbers that I show on the left-hand side of the, right-hand side of the column, that we have some volume of instruments are currently available in the market, which kind of tells us the size, at least in the initial phase of it. So, and we could also sense some idea of just to have ourselves to sensitize on the pricing, that the equivalent carbon pricing in the ESET market, if we kind of try to extrapolate, it is coming out around $7 to $8. The RECs are being currently sold at around 260 rupees, so around $3 per unit of carbon. And the projects of CDM type are generally in range of $10. So this is the kind of a price landscape that is broadly existing now. And for the carbon credit trading scheme that is now under construction is where, we are looking at, it has started with the amendment of the Energy Conservation Act in 2022. And currently we are considering 9 sectors. I will give you the details. So the expected actions in the Indian carbon market is expected to happen in somewhere in the, say, later part of 2026. So this is the timeline of the evolution that has happened in India. We have amended the EC Energy Conservation Act in December of 2022. Then the notification for the compliance mechanism for carbon market compliance part of the carbon credit was published in June. In December, the voluntary component was notified. And in the March of 2024, we published the kind of finalized sectors that those are going to be covered under the CCTS in the compliance. Then 10 sectors that are going to be put under the offset or included in the offset market has been identified in the May of 2024. September, we have published the broader MRV process and the accreditation procedure for the accrediting agencies process verification, as well as the accreditation of the agencies who are going to do the verification. So then we are working on the offset mechanisms, procedural development, so methodologies and other standards that are being looked into, and these are being put to the highest the National Steering Committee for approval. And the final point is that by October, November of 2026, some projects will get registered and verified and issued certain carbon credits, and that might lead to movement in the market in the timelines of October, November of 2026. So these are the two notifications that we brought out, one in June of 2020. So this is June of 2026 carbon credit notification for the compliance and for the voluntary. So this I will not go into. So this is the institutional framework within which the Indian carbon market will be working. So we have kept most of the institutional structure that existed for the working of the PAT energy saving certificate trading, so that it requires very little modification or changes while graduating to the carbon market for all the players, as many of the players that here, in the two regime, the institutional structure will be governing the both compliance as well as the voluntary scheme. So there would be obligated entities and non-obligated entities. Obligated entities would be under the compliance mechanism, and non-obligated entities would be in the voluntary space. So all those will be called as registered entities, because they would be requirement for the registration at a certain space, so that the overall assessment of the projects and the quantum of certificates would be available at one place. So there would be registry, which registry earlier in the PAT scheme we had Grid India as the registry, and we're continuing with that. And the power exchanges, the existing power exchanges of Energy Exchange, PXIL and HPX, 3 power exchanges are in India. Those would be used for trading of the carbon credits. And the power exchanges are regulated by the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. So the carbon trading regulator will also be Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. And overall administrative responsibility will be of Bureau of Energy Efficiency under the twin guidance from the Ministry of Power and the Ministry of Environment and Forest, where there is a National Steering Committee that you see here. It would be co-chaired by the Secretary, Ministry of Power, and Secretary, Ministry of Environment and Forest. So the composition of the steering committee is as follows. As you see at the top, the 2 co-chairs, and then the key ministries involved in the space of carbon, energy, and other related areas, and also key departments, organization, public sector units, and also 2 states representatives, Government of Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu. And we have industry representative from as CII and FIPI, and we also have 2 experts who have been in this field. Shri R.R. Rashmi ji is here, and he is part of the steering committee, and former Secretary MNRE, Shri Upendra Tripathi ji is also one of the expert. So this is a apex committee for the carbon market, which will guide and steer the overall movement of the carbon market. So this I would also just, for the sake of repetition, compliance market where obligated entities will be given a emission-based target, and the offset mechanism as based on the whatever assessment beyond the additionality they can approve beyond the baseline. So that there's a mechanism that I will also go through. But one point here that I would like to highlight is that our targets are intensity-based target. We are not targeting as per the EU mechanism of capping. We are not capping the overall emission from any sector or economy-wide, recognizing that India is still going to use energy, and in the quantum of usage would be increasing to meet its developmental goals. So the absolute emission would keep increasing to certain time frame, while using the energy or the resources that would be efficiently used. So we are imposing or mandating the intensity-based target. So this is the broad comparison of two mechanisms. As the name itself suggests, the compliance would be mandatory, offset would be voluntary. Entities, we are looking at the large-scale emitters, hard-to-abate sectors, to say simply in the compliance market. Of course, in the voluntary market, it could be a mix of all possible combinations or participants. The level of implementation is also interesting. In case of India, we are taking that boundary as a facility level boundary. In a country like in the EU ETS, they take project level or the equipment level boundaries. So we are taking facility level. So each industry would be each unit, and those industrial inputs and output would be guided by a fixed boundary. And credit in the compliance would be used for the meeting the targets, and in the voluntary for the offsetting purposes. In the compliance, since it is a target based, so additionality is inbuilt in a sense. However, in the offset, one has to definitely establish the additionality to be qualified for the issuance of the carbon credit. Scope, we are keeping sector-specific targeted obligated entities. The voluntary, it would be larger, broad scope with large. We have, as we have seen, that there are 10 areas. Those 10 areas are including the 17 areas that UNFCCC has identified in the list of projects that are covered under the voluntary market. So that will be very broad, ranging from energy to forestry to agriculture and so on. The credit issuance is against the target. If one is achieving beyond the target, then the credits would be issued. And in the voluntary space, if they are able to attain avoidance beyond the baseline, then equivalent emissions or equivalent certificates will be issued. So this is the first set of sectors that are going to participate in the carbon credit trading scheme. We have 9 sectors in the right down corner, where totaling, I think, 830 odd units put together from 9 sectors, and major hard-to-abate sectors, steel, cement, petrochemical, aluminium, refinery, fertilizer, and so on. So this is the first phase, and as we move further, and some of the sectors are still under PAT scheme. So some units are also under PAD scheme. So as they graduate from PAD, so they will be transitioning to the carbon credit scheme. So we are currently covering only the CO2 emission and little part of PFC in the case of aluminium, but the rest is the energy emission and process emission in terms of the emissions of CO2. So just to explain how the methodology works, we establish a benchmark for a sector based on the intensity, and then you again give a target of that much intensity. And if the industry in the first case, if you see the industry or the unit has been able to achieve much more than the target, so the intensity is much lower than what the target was, 2.2 to 2.2. So that 2.2 extra, the reduction that it has been able to achieve will be equivalent certificates will be issued. On the other hand, in the case 2, if there is a shortfall, the target was to bring to 2.2, but the plant would reach only 2.4 from the 2.5. So 0.2 equivalent shortfall will have to be compensated by buying the certificate from the market. So very simple mechanism. And in the offset mechanism, there would be a baseline establishment. And if there is a reduction below the baseline, in addition to that, so if one can show that additional reduction, so equivalent amount of carbon credit will be issued in the voluntary market for the projects that they undertake. So this is the mechanism and architecture of this, that we have administrator, the Indian Carbon Market Administrator as Bureau of Energy Efficiency, assisted by technical committees. Then steering committee will approve that, and then finally it goes to the central government. So the components of the, you can say the process is the sector identification, methodology, project cycle, and then operational part is what are the role responsibility of different participants, project developers, verifiers, and administrator, and so on. So a typical cycle for an offset mechanism is at the project scale, and then once the project is registered, account creation, account registration, then the submission of the project document, validation of the document, and then final project is registered, and then the project will be monitored, and finally that project will be again verified by an agency, accredited carbon verification agency, and finally based on the report of the agency, the equivalent carbon certificates will be issued. So this would be the process that would be followed, and this is again, as Rashmi sir mentioned, that India is not new to such process. Several of the projects that India had, so the similar process has to be adopted. So for the scope, as I mentioned in the previous slide, there were 10 sectors, including these 10 sectors include all the 17 areas that has been identified under the UNFCCC's voluntary market scope. So here, if you see energy might contain 2-3 categories of energy, which is kind of bifurcated or separated terminologies in the UNFCCC. So we have tried to consolidate to suit our context in so similarly in the industries, like manufacturing, consumer, so several other categories are there, but we have clubbed together as a industry, so on and so forth. So we have categorized as 10 sectors, out of which we have phased loosely phased in to facilitate the methodologies and other documentation development to first 6 as a phase 1, and the second phase, the other 4 sectors will follow after the first phase. So then we are currently in process of further detailing the compliance procedure, and then we are finalizing the targets to the sectors that are going to be notified. So we are currently in a process of auditing the baselines of all the 800 odd units of the 9 sectors. So once that is done, so based on the verified benchmarks, we will notify the targets. The capacity building, we are regularly holding workshops and meetings and other consultations to make this mechanisms and processes available to all the stakeholders. We are also developing monitoring MRV guidelines, and I think the baseline audit I have already mentioned. And in the offset mechanism, again, the procedural developments are in process. We are holding workshops. We hold several of the online as well as offline workshops. We are creating templates for project documentation to facilitate the project developers and also the verifiers. And other than that, we are also in a process of initiating the activity accreditation of the agencies. Those are going to verify the projects. So we are planning to upgrade to a large extent the existing cadre of energy auditing firms that has been utilized for the PAT scheme. So we are also developing a very IT infrastructure for registration and other requirements so that it can be facilitated through technology for verification, registration, validation, and several other activities that are required. And I think that is a broad update from the carbon market. So once again, thank you very much. And I would look forward if there are any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ashok Kumar. There may be some questions in the QA box which you may look at, and I'm sure you can either answer in the box or you can answer in the audience after the session is at the end of the session. So we will now proceed to the next speaker, Ms. Agamani Ghosh. She has been a financial journalist and has worked with CNBC, Business Standard, etc., covering economic policy, bond market, etc. And she's now the managing editor of the Carbon Markets Pricing, APAC, and strategic lead for global compliance carbon at S&P Global Commodity Insights. She leads the expansion of developing market-based data, pricing, and content coverage for existing and developing carbon markets. So, Ms. Ghosh, please.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen, but I also want to welcome Ashna Mishra, who is joining me from my organization. Ashna, if you could just introduce yourself meanwhile.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Agamoni. So while Agamoni shares her screen, I'm Ashna. I'm based out of the same office in Gurgaon as Agamoni, and I lead the strategic engagement for energy transition at S&P Global Commodity Insights. But within energy transition, my key focus area is renewables, which when I say renewables, it's largely the environmental attribute certificates market, which of course we will delve into as we start sharing the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Ashna Mishra. Welcome. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Yes, I'm just trying to put it on slide. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Now?
Not
No.
yet.
Okay, let me try and reshare this.
Yeah.
Okay, now.
Yep, okay. I'm just going to put it on full slide. Yeah. Is that clear now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'll actually let Ashna start, and then I'll go into the more details of the presentation. Over to you, Ashna.
Thanks, Agamoni. So hi, everyone again. And as Agamoni mentioned, and Mr. Dr. Kumar mentioned earlier, that we will be talking about navigating carbon markets today. And I will just quickly give an introduction about what we are going to be talking about and about what we do, and then let Agamoni take over. So today, what we will discuss is...
Can you make these slides bigger, because you have this second slide also is coming with this. That's make it smaller, and so if you can have only one slide there, that will make it easy for people to read.
Is it clear now?
So Agamoni,
Yes,
we
yes.
can see the current slide as well as the next slide. So if you could,
Okay.
yeah.
Let me just stop share and share just one screen. Now I think you can see only one.
Okay. Oh, okay, it's gone back to the same.
Okay.
Came for a second.
Okay. So sorry for this. I don't know why both are showing up actually. Let me just try and do this once. Sorry.
It's fine. Go ahead with whatever you have. It's okay.
Sorry for this. Yeah. Should be okay now.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Better, yeah.
So all right then, so let's look at the agenda that we would be covering today. So Agamoni would be touching upon the global carbon market landscape and would be delving slightly into the different types of market in brief, both the voluntary side as well as the compliance side of it. And also why it is important, how is pricing important in the VCM markets, as well as an overview of the Asian ETS markets. On to the next slide, Agamoni. Yeah. So before we get into talking about the markets, here's just a quick introduction of the sort of offerings we have on the energy transition side at S&P Global Commodity Insights. So as you can see on the screen right now, there are 4 tenets to energy transition at S&P Global. We have carbon, renewables, hydrogen and ammonia, and also biofuels. So on the carbon side of things, S&P Global offers a comprehensive coverage while tracking the avoidance as well as the removal credits. And of course, this is done on both the voluntary carbon market side as well as the compliance market side. Then on renewables, what we offer are energy attribute certificates assessments. When I say energy attribute certificates, we do assess IREX, which stands for the International Renewable Energy Certificates markets. We have a global suite of assessments for that. Other than that, we also have European GEOs, which actually also were our first offering in 2019. We have the REGOs in UK. We also have the US REX assessments in the Americas, as well as a suite of the emission adjusted REX in the Americas again. Other than carbon and renewables, we also have assessments for hydrogen and ammonia. We have had a market first hydrogen price assessment since the December of 2019, plus of course ammonia and origin certificates, and both hydrogen and ammonia, for both of them we have both the market based assessments as well as model based assessments. And then we also have a wide suite of assessments for biofuels, which actually currently sits as a separate department at S&P Global. And the most important thing here, of course, is that all of these things, they are backed by the solid heritage that S&P Global brings along with it, with itself. So we have an over 100 years of experience providing benchmark prices for the energy markets, which includes more than 15 years of covering the low carbon commodities. So yeah, next slide, Agamoni. Again, before just getting into it quickly, why are price assessments important, and basically why do we provide these price assessments, or why do we do the benchmarking, which is needed not only in the other traditional energy markets, but we feel that's also really important in the emerging markets like carbon markets, because commodities or even certificates for that matter, they are not homogeneous at all. And what we at S&P Global or Platts do is we establish standards that provide a common understanding for each of these commodities attributes. And on the screen, what you see are a few ways in which these price assessments or standards that we set are used by the players in the market. So for example, the buyers, sellers, or traders, they can use our assessments or the numbers that we publish as a basis for their spot transactions or their term contracts. Similarly, risk managers can use our assessments to settle contracts or to place market value on the products that they hold. Analysts again can use the assessments to identify the supply demand dynamics in the market to see how the price trends are going on. Similarly, in the commodities market specifically, governments sometimes reference prices to formulate royalty payments or to formulate retail prices, and numbers are also used by commodity exchanges, clearing houses, as well as financial institutions for listing, trading, and clearing purposes. Next slide, please. And now before I hand over to Agamuni, we also wanted to highlight how our Platts benchmark, they try to strike a balance between individuality and fungibility to meet diverse market needs. This is of course, like specific for carbon. So when I say individuality, there are some credits like the Australian forestry credits, which are valued for their unique and granular traits. These allow specific assessments and price differentials to reflect the distinctive qualities of these assets. While on the other side, there can be things like NGO, which are highly standardized, maximizing liquidity and enabling broad trade across regions. Their homogeneity ensures a market-wide relevance. So the Platts nature-based avoidance credit basically tries to bridge these two, maintaining enough individuality for unique value while being standardized for broad tradability and market relevance. So with this, I would now pass on to Agamuni, who, as was mentioned earlier, manages the APAC carbon pricing team at S&P Global and also leads the global compliance markets. And she will now delve deeper into the carbon markets. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashna. So we're going to start with looking at, of course, some of the key fundamentals of the carbon markets today. But I wanted to start with this slide in terms of looking at decarbonization as a strategy and how carbon markets actually fit in the gamut of decarbonization, right? So we see three sort of main approaches when we look at decarbonization. One is being the replacement approach, right? So that is the long-term approach that is to be taken by, companies and industries, which is replacing conventional fuels at some point to low to negative emissions. So that's almost like looking at the fuels of the future, right? Attribute of is very important. I think Sir before this mentioned about carbon intensity in terms of why the Indian market in particular is going to be an intensity-based approach, right? So that becomes an important attribute of production. So much like having an attribute of sulfur in oil, carbon intensity starts to become an attribute for production values, especially among hard-to-abate sectors like iron and steel, fertilizers, petchems, right? So there are carbon intensity certificates also designed to do that, and also provisions in terms of reducing the carbon intensity in the value chain process. The offset approach is actually where the carbon markets play an important role, right? Which is buying carbon credits or even allowances in the compliance markets to offset emissions in the production and transportation project. Now, these could be wide range of credit types or options on scope of emissions to offset, and there's obviously a strong credibility required to do that. This is, of course, a short-term approach. We look at it in terms of decarbonization, but it's also an immediate and important one because it takes time to formulate, long-term decarbonization strategy. And by the time you do that and you have exhausted all your options for looking at decarbonizations, then you come to the carbon market to look at it as a last resort, or how do you look at offsetting this, right? in terms of the landscape, how we look at the segregation of the market, because it's not a homogeneous market like most other commodity markets. We look at it in terms of these 4 broad categories, and some of them in future may end up being interlooped into each other, right? For example, if you start on the top left with the voluntary credits market, right? This is the private project-based market that's driven by methodologies overseen by private standards, which is open to everyone. It's a very global market in nature. But remember that this was born from the erstwhile CDM era credit market, right? So which used to be the Kyoto market at some point, but because of a gap in the market of not having, a proper market with the Article 6 market up until now, that gap was filled by the voluntary market, right? So you have the likes of standards like Gold Standard, Vera, GCC, and many others, which continue to issue, mitigation activity credit issuances, and that's a very, very thriving market right now. Article 6 is something recent. It came in with the formulation of the Paris Agreement, but because of it has been many have been in conjunction, and it was only this COP that it was formulated and sort of implemented. It is still time for the market to pick up in terms of there are no actual issuances from these projects in the market yet, so it will be a while before this market takes full shape. So it is a newer version. We see a lot of governments, countries including India, moving towards this, especially 6.2, which is done with the view of bilateral agreements between 2 countries, so there will be specific methodologies designed around that. 6.4 is where it intertwines with the current voluntary market, right? Because that could be looked at either complementary or at some point, a market that will look to get shape within that. So it is managed and traded nationally in terms of 6.2, which is bilateral, but 6.4 will be more of a centralized sort of global market that we're looking at. On the right side, what you look at are the compliance and mandatory markets, and newer systems and more market mechanisms as they show up show us that compliance markets are not only allowance-based markets, but they can be credits markets as well. So of course you have your traditional cap and trade markets like the EU ETS, the South Korean ETS, the California ETS. Those are all your allowance-based markets, but credits markets also have a big role to play in the compliance markets. For example, Australia is a credits compliance market, or the global market that you see for aviation credits, which is COSIA, is also a compliance market, which means that credits are used in these markets, but they are driven by methodologies that are overseen by authorities. It means there's a proper firm regulatory body which decides how the market is going to function. And going into detail, some of this may be a little bit of a repetition from some of the earlier presenters, but I do want to go over quickly into some of how they distinct from each other. So broadly speaking, in terms of offset market in ETS markets, what we see, other than it being mandatory and not mandatory, there are some, chief features that do distinguish them, right? Including one that comes to how trading actually takes place in these markets, right? In the offset markets, it's largely a very, very OTC driven market. There are some exchanges now, which do operate in the scope, but it's very, very OTC driven simply because the products are very, very non-homogeneous. So there's not much scope for in terms of standardized trading in these markets. Vis-a-vis ETS, especially allowance markets are sort of pegged to be very, very exchange traded. There are some markets where it's still very OTC. Let's take the example of maybe the New Zealand ETS market, right, where there's no defined exchange as of now. But more or less, it's very, very exchange heavy traded, like the EU ETS or the China ETS or the South Korea ETS, right? Examples for users, of course, carbon offsets can be used for both compliance and voluntary, right? So there are provisions now coming up where offsets or a part of offsets can be used in compliance systems as well. But for ETS, either allowances or credits that are used, there's usually no voluntary angle. It can be started in terms of a, pilot move to start like getting, industries used to it, but mostly these are for mandatory purposes and not for voluntary purposes. And under the compliance schemes, of course, you have 2 distinct type of systems. There's carbon taxes, which is more efficient in terms of if you're implementing it early on, which means that if you have a high threshold for a carbon tax, it is more efficient. We've seen when damages from emissions grow slowly slowly. So most of the carbon taxes you'll see globally, which are not very high, were implemented way back, right, where there was enough time to have an effect, because in a carbon tax your price that you put on the cost of carbon is fixed, but you really cannot control the amount of emissions that you want to make lower over time. In an ETS, which is an emissions trading scheme, the price is dynamic, which means that it is market control most of the times, but you can choose to set either baselines or caps, right, in terms of having targets on how you want the emissions to be lower. So ETS is seen as a more efficient, and we've seen actually more ETSs grow over times vis-a-vis carbon taxes, because it is easier to set limits on emission standards and be able to achieve those NDC goals that countries have set for themselves. And under those, of course, there can be two broad types. There's cap and trade, which is a traditional carbon markets that we have seen, the likes of EU ETS or South Korea. Baseline and credit is something that I think Sir explained in the previous presentation very well. It's going to be what India is also going to implement. So their intensity-based baselines actually set to reduce unintended economic consequences, which means that it is very, very production activity-based as well, which means that the entire industry will not have the same kind of cap. A cap is also difficult for a baseline and credit system, because these are for growth-oriented economies where it is not a certain when emissions will peak, right? So we see the likes of Indonesia, India, in some format, even China's hybrid system is a form of intensity-based system. So these are intensity-based caps and not the hard caps like the cap and trade systems. In terms of the offset market, how it's designed and how it functions, really there's like a supply side to it and the buy side to it. The buy side can be quite, versatile in terms of who uses it. Sometimes it can be the compliance players as well, right? The offset side, those are just some of the most popular mitigation activity methods that we have, put out there. And there's a typical process of getting the project design validated, emission mitigation verification done, and then issuances. Now, these could be done at different levels. Like if it's in the voluntary market, these are done by your standards like Gold Standard and Vera. This could be also done in the new capacity of the Article 6 markets by the UNFCCC, right? Or it could be done in domestic markets as well, domestic offset markets where there's a standard that is recognized, a domestic standard. So your likes of Korean offset credits or your Japan J credit systems, they follow more or less the same format, but there might be different standards and authorities who do this. And once that offset is decided to be retired by the buyer, right? These are typically the range of buyers that we see in terms of who buy these offsets for their voluntary reduction. And in terms of segregation on the types of main two types of credits that we see in the VCM market, there are, of course, reduction and avoidance credits, which reduce or avoid GHG emissions, and removal credits that actively capture and permanently sequester carbon. We further look at it in terms of two, broad aspects, that's technology-based and nature-based. These are just some of the more popular ones. There could be over, 100 methodologies really across standards. So if you look at something like a technology-based in the avoidance side, you have technologies like renewable energy, landfill gas waste, a household device which is basically your cook stoves or your water-related projects or energy efficiency projects. And nature-based, of course, relates to a lot of the RED Plus projects that we see, avoided deforestation or methane from livestock. So these would all be under avoided category. Right now, the structure of the market is such that about 80 to 90% of the market is, issued in terms of avoidance credits. Less than 10% is actually removal credits, because it takes longer to get removals credits issued, and also it's not happened as progressively as one would have liked. So there are lesser issuances in the market. Also, it's very, very expensive compared to avoidance credits being issued, right? So unless you have large investors pooling in for these projects, we don't see a lot of issuances. So, biochar, direct air capture, BECS, mineralization are some of the most popular tech-based removal technologies that we see. And in nature-based, of course, you have blue carbon, reforestation, wetland and soil sequestration as some of the most popular nature-based projects. Now, in terms of voluntary and compliance, of course, there's a segregation in terms of how these markets have operated, but we're looking at what it means for the future and the evolution of the two, and should they work together and or apart, right? Of course, it is with the nature of how the markets is designed. It was always not surprising that at some point the offset and mitigation markets will have to work in conjunction with with the compliance markets, because that is the biggest push and driver for industries to decarbonize, right? So most existing compliance markets do exclude the use of voluntary credits towards compliance obligation as it stands, but new mechanisms are starting to change that, right? We're starting to see an acceptance for some types of offset that can be used in some compliance schemes. For example, systems like China, South Korea, or even Singapore have stated that in some capacity offsets can be used. It could be 5% to 10%. That could change over time as well, but at least there's an avenue to use that, right? Then there are credit-only based compliance schemes emerging. The biggest example being ICAO's CORSIA, which is the first global hybrid market that we are to look at, where credits can be used from the voluntary market, but it is going to be regulated completely by ICAO. So it is a compliance market at the end of the day, but you can use credits in those. ACCUs, which are Australian carbon credits, are actually voluntary credits, but can be used completely in the compliance system. So that's starting to change a little bit. What about the traditional ETS and offsets markets? Can they work together? So we've seen a little bit of a revision and a little bit of a new dynamics when it comes to some of the older systems like EU ETS. Or even the UK ETS for now, saying that they are looking at or consulting on the usage of offsets in their system. However, because of market integrity barriers and price points, they do want to be cautious, and they would be looking at only the removals to be used after 2030. Now, a big reason for this may have been because of the price point, because removals are very, very highly priced, and those are which can match the price of, say, like a EUA allowance or a UK allowance, right? But if you look at the avoidance markets, they're very, very low in nature. So if you introduce that into an ETS system, the market may end up crashing, right? So this is why there's a little bit of a hesitance to letting every sort of offset being used. Singapore has allowed VCM credits to meet 5% of the obligation. So that's another mechanism that we see. Japan in Asia has also allowed removal only credits again to be used. So we're seeing some changes in the landscape of regulations where it comes to see how these can be used. And if you look at it, it's not just the voluntary credits only from the international market. We have some examples here which show you how carbon credits can be used under a compliance system, right? So you have something like international crediting mechanisms. So these are CDM credits in Korea, which can be used by mandated companies. The domestic crediting mechanism, so whether it's the domestic offset programs in countries like California, Japan, or China, CCER, all of these can be used by the mandatory requirement to be met in these countries. And there are independent crediting mechanisms. So if you look at the countries who are implementing carbon tax, right, like Singapore, Colombia, South Africa, all allow in some capacity VCM credits to be used. Of course, there may be certain standards. For example, South Africa says that you can only use those which are for projects that are originated within the country, right? So that is something that we look at, but it just goes on to show that the landscape is evolving, and we could see newer systems being more acceptable to using offsets within the compliance system. Pricing and white matter, especially in the VCM, how it's different, right? Some of the things that really affect the kinds of credits that we price in the market are more or less in this slide that you see. So there's a big differentiation in terms of the standard, the type of credits, the vintage, the co-benefits associated, and the volumes, right? So if you do go into the market, a renewable energy credit will not be the same price as a household device credit, or a household device credit will not be the same price as a direct air capture credit. While cost is one big factor associated with it, but things like vintages. So vintage is something that is associated with every credit in terms of what the limitations are for when that expires, right? Which means that the newer vintage is thought to have a more premium in the market compared to older vintages. Standards also do reflect some sort of premium and discount. Typically, the more stringent the standard, the more difficult to get your certification done, usually would have more premium because there's a perceived notion that there was more sort of done by the parties to get that project issued, right? Which means in terms of integrity, that is looked at with a higher lens, which means that something from a gold standard may have a higher premium. Co-benefits, as stated either by the UN's SDG goals, or they could be additional co-benefits like being indigenous, or being completely sort of nature based. Those sort of add extra premium points to the particular credit. And volume, of course, in terms of we see large volume offtake deals, especially for removals credits done at a discount if they are done as outside the spot market. But in terms of the spot market, if they're smaller deals, there's usually a higher price to that. And in terms of the category of prices for some of the most popular price assessments overview that we assess at Platts, you have the CORSIA credit, you have the nature-based credit avoidance, and you have methane collection, household devices, which are your cook stoves, right? Natural carbon capture in terms of removal credits, tech carbon capture, which are mostly biochar credits, and blue carbon, which are mangrove protection forest credits, right? And we'll be sharing this later so you can have a look at them in detail on how that sub. Now I'm going to move a little bit towards how the market has functioned, right? Before we move on to the overview of the Asian ETS markets. So one of the things, and I'm sure many of you have read, with your time of how the offsets markets have done, quality concerns and regulatory shifts have been the biggest talking point when it comes to the VCM market, and they continue to apply downward pressure in 2024 as well. So 2023 is when we saw a big slump in prices because of a lot of integrity-based, articles that did come out. So you see that prices had reached an all-time high around 21, started to really slip from 22 post the Russia-Ukraine war, but that was more of a broad-based impact because of what happened to all asset classes, really. But for VCM in particular, post the Guardian article claiming 90% of whereas Red Plus credits were worthless, and followed by a lot more scrutiny, we saw a big slump in prices, and it has really never gone back to those levels since then. We've also seen the spread between avoidance and removals widen, right? So that's been something that we continue to sort of see in terms of removal starting to get that premium. The only price that has started to pick up is the CORSIA price, which has moved to phase 1, right? So it is right now in the avoidance market, one of the most trusted and highly revered integrity-based credits that we see. But overall, we still see the downturn has been driven by quality concerns. There have been a lot of changes. We have the formation of the ICVCM. We have a lot more stringency now from the standards. But despite that, we've seen a very, very small pickup in the prices, and we still see avoidance prices in the range of probably 50 cents to maybe $10 to $12, not really more than that. And before we move on to the overview of the Asian ETS markets, I'd like to go through some of the main compliance markets that we look at. Platts, sorry, this is going, yeah. So of course you have the Australia market, where we do around 6 kind of prices for the different credits that are operational there. We have the New Zealand units, the South Korea allowance, and the offset credits. EU ETS, of course, one of the most popular markets in terms of the most liquid contracts. UK's allowances, California, and Reggie as well. Now I'm going to quickly move to the Asian ETSs, which will be more interesting in the landscape of what we're looking at, how these systems are very, very different from the traditional ones. So one of the things that we do see are that power and industry continue to be the sectors to most covered by ETSs, right? I would say agriculture is the least covered. It's something that's being explored by countries, but it's very, very nascent. But the first industries to be covered are always power and industry. And then, of course, there are some systems which have gone ahead and, covered other systems like, forestry or waste also under that. So we look at some of the more advanced systems. Actually, there are three most advanced ones that we see in Asia right now. And then we look at the newer systems and how they're shaping up, including looking at how India's market is shaping up. So the first one is Australia, which is a very interesting one because it's a combination of compliance and voluntary. It is one of the only systems to have a credits only market. So ACCUs, which are Australian carbon credit units, are actually voluntary based, mitigation based credits, but they can be fully used for compliance purposes. It's a fully functioning market since 2012, so it has been there around for a while. And from 2025, it is legislated, to go more a sort of compliance, right? Which means that more stricter baselines will be set, which means that the demand for something like ACCUs is going to increase. Just like the voluntary credits market, right? There are different methodologies that are set by the, clean energy regulator, which is the authority here. So just similarities with some of the other voluntary markets that you have, the methodologies may differ, but as long as they follow what's being, talked about by the regulators, they can be used, these issuances from these credits can be used for, compliance purposes. And you'll see because of the differentiation, there's a differentiation in the pricing as well. As a compliance entity, you can choose to use, the most competitive price in the market, but the volumes may always not reflect towards the most competitive prices. So typically buyers will go out and buy the kinds of credits that is available, right? And usually nature-based credits or removal credits have a higher price compared to this thing. One thing to see, however, is as a system becomes compliant, right, a lot of these segregations do move away. So you see that the three most liquid categories here have started to converge. This is because when companies come for fulfilling their mandatory obligations, they are willing to pay the cheapest price that's available, right? Which means that the premium for some of these categories do start to erode. And we're seeing that more and more happen in the system. The New Zealand ETS is a simple ETS, very similar to the EU ETS, right, which has hard caps, right? So cap and trade system supported by a floor price. Majority of allocations do happen via auctions, right? Participants are free to trade in the secondary market as well. One of the highlights is that it's one of the first systems that, is going to recognize agriculture, not maybe part of the same ETS, but as part of a different market mechanisms. And it may be the first country to bring in agriculture emissions under its purview, right? It's also the highest price for carbon that we see in Asia Pacific right now. Then you have the South Korean ETS, which was launched in 2015 to become East Asia's first nationwide mandatory ETS. In terms of coverage for sectors, it is one of the most widely covered markets, means that it includes not just power and industry, but buildings, aviation, waste, and some of the other sectors as well. So pretty much except for maybe agriculture, it includes all the other sectors. There is no carbon tax in the systems. It's a dynamic price, but there's an offset market, which was aligned with the CDM technology, but now with Article 6 coming in, it is likely to be aligned with the 6.2 and 6.4 versions of the market, right? Which means 5% of these offsets can be used by for mandatory requirements. And you'll see that despite being in separate stages of operation of these markets, there's a big differentiation in the prices when it comes to compliance markets. So traditionally, we've seen Western compliance market outperform because of how big the market is in terms of the maturity and size as well. But we're seeing that gap close in as the other markets start to proceed as well, and more, entities get covered by the compliance schemes. So you'll see that, the New Zealand prices or the California, the Australia prices very, very slowly creeping up to some of those UK prices as well. So as systems gets more stringent, we do see, the bullishness in some of these newer mechanisms as well. Now to look at some of the newer systems, right, which are not operational but are coming up, right? So Japan is one of them, right? It's going to be among the 5 largest emission markets. So there's of course China, India, like US, but after that is Japan. So Japan has been one of the pioneers when it comes to something like Article 6.2 or the joint credited mechanism. They have the most number of bilateral deals globally with most countries, means that they have MOU signed with over 28 countries, I believe, which means that they are now in a comfortable position to, do projects in these countries, with these host countries, and be able to, get those credits when they are issued out of these projects, right? But what they're also looking at is a compliance market, which is going to be called the GX League. Right now, they have a carbon tax, which is close to about $2, which is not considered enough to be able to meet their NDC goals, right? So they will have a dynamic ETS pricing system from 2026. Companies have signed up for it voluntarily for now, and there's voluntary trading going on, so that's not compliant yet. But one of the things that I talked about earlier is that newer systems like Japan is allowing the avenue to use offset credits, right? So not just Article 6.2 credits, but something called G credits, which is their domestic, voluntary credits, as well as CDR, which is removal only VCM credits, can be used in the compliance systems once 2026 kicks in, right? So which means it offers the industry players an option to use offset credits along with the allowances. Singapore has obviously kicked off from 2024 its carbon tax, and that's going to only increase every year, right? But about 5% of the taxable emissions can be offset by using international voluntary credits, and there are proper defined, regulations to do that in terms of what standards are eligible, what kind of credits are eligible, and in terms of 6.2, these are just some of the significant ones that they've had MOU with. Closer to, in terms of how the carbon markets look, especially in terms of an intensity-based system. A good example is Indonesia, because again, very, very heavily focused on, coal production. So an intensity-based system is something that suits that more than a cap and trade system. So covers only grid-connected coal-fired power plants for now, but will be expanded to more sectors later on. It's unique in the way that, there is an ETS market which operates like a intensity-based approach, but there's also a carbon tax which is going to be put if, somebody is not able to meet those baseline levels. We haven't really heard anyone being able to pay that tax and still operate within the purview of that ETS price. But that is something interesting to watch. And they also have announced their own version of an offset market. Indonesia is host to a lot of nature-based projects that are certified under some of the international voluntary schemes, but there's also going to be a separate offset markets which is endorsed by the government with its own standard as well. So again, an example of how offset markets and national ETS markets do come together. And then, of course, we have India. I think it was explained in detail in the previous presentation, but I can go through it quickly in terms of what it is. So, of course, there used to be the PAT scheme, right? And the transition is really happening for some of those sectors to move into the carbon credit trading scheme. Will happen in phases. I think some of those sectors were discussed in the previous slides as well. The offset market is interesting, which means non-obligated, but there will be an established carbon offset mechanism, which will look at specific methodologies that will be designed and projects to be hosted under that that. There's still time for those detailed methodologies to come in, but what we do know is some of those subsectors and technologies have been identified in terms of phase 1 and phase 2. Um, the BE is, as we know, is expected to announce maybe the methodologies for these sectors in the phase 1, maybe in 2025, which will give more clarity to project developers mainly on, some of these technologies that they may wish to choose for their projects and under what sectors would be beneficial for them to do so, right? I do see some questions, but I'm just going to try and finish the slide and take some. And just in terms of how currently India stands in terms of offsets, right, issuances, this is mainly based on the international voluntary market, right? So we are one of the largest issuers of carbon credits globally, right? It's issued around 334 million credits since 2010. Right, about 90% or more of that was for renewable energy, but we're seeing new, avenues come up for other sectors as well, like household devices or ARR, or sometimes even removal credits like biochar, right? But largely what we're seeing is the issuances have been in the RE category. Annual issuances have, however, fallen between 21 and 23, with 23 levels actually 50% lower than 21. In 24, we are still to look at the whole year, but this is just, I think, up until October, what the issuances look like. So you can see the percentage of projects from household devices and some of the other ones like natural carbon capture and methane collection increasing over the years. Before, it was largely pegged towards renewable energy, but we do see new sectors coming in as well, right? So I think that is all from my side, but I am going to have a look at maybe the Asha, are you able to see the questions in the folder if there's anything for us?
Yeah, there is. So there was one on hydrogen, which I have already answered.
Okay.
There are two questions for you, Agamoni. The first one is, again, I think you have already touched upon it, but in case you want to add anything. So the
Sure.
first one is, are you aware of JCM and the plan to work under Article 6.2 of Paris Agreement?
Sure. So, JCM with relation to India. So, yeah, India has not signed any MOU that we know of. It's not been publicly announced, right? But if it would be, that would fall under the category of JCM. So that would be under Article 6.2. So the joint crediting mechanism would work that, let's take an example, if they were to sign a deal with, let's say, Japan in this case, after the MOU is signed, the joint crediting mechanism would have members from both countries as part of the committee who would then decide on the agreed methodologies, right? And then what would be the, process for doing it? What would be the share of agreement also in certain projects between the two countries? So India would act as the host country, Japan would act as the buyer or the investor country. And we've seen that happen with other countries. There are already GCM committees that, let's say, Japan or Singapore have with other countries, where it solely depends on the GCM committee deciding what those, crediting timelines or the methodologies will look like.
There is
Yeah.
another question for you, Agmoni.
Sure.
And yeah, this is the last one. So you have stated it in one of your slides that a carbon tax is more efficient when damages from emissions grow slowly and steadily and abatement
Yeah.
costs rise quickly.
Yeah.
Now, the question is that since experts have recorded that the world has already done so much of damage to atmosphere, Earth, sea, etc., it may take like 10,000s of years for restoration of carbon balance in the ecosystem, even if we stop all emissions today. So
Yeah.
I think they've just requested to explain the statement above.
Sure. So I think why that is because, like I said, in a carbon tax scenario, you can't place a target for reducing emissions, right? So which means that you can keep a very high carbon tax, you can keep it as $100 or $200, right? But you still don't have control over how much emissions you want to reduce. So if as a country or an industry you're trying to reduce emissions and have a target, right? An ETS usually works better because you at least know the amount of emissions you're looking to reduce, right? And if those targets are stringent enough, like we have seen with the case of, let's say, EU ETS or New Zealand ETS, then automatically your price, which is dynamic, starts to move towards an upward trajectory and your cost of carbon actually pushes up. It's not that carbon taxes have not been successful, but if you look at those which have really benefited are the ones which are very, very high, north of $100, right? Now, pushing a very high carbon tax for a newer system or a newer mechanism where people are not used to emissions accounting even now is looked at as not very industry friendly as well. So that's when ETS is looked at a way to let industry players get used to the system rather than having, carbon tax. It's not that carbon tax is not being adopted, right? But we have seen the preference for ETSs because you can set a target and timeline for emission reductions vis-a-vis a carbon tax where you can't really control or even ascertain where your emissions are or how they will reduce or when they will reduce. Yeah.
Agamoni, there's one more question has come up for you. Sorry.
Okay.
Would you explain why US markets are not seen in your plot of trading schemes of emissions?
Right. So US does not have a national carbon market, right? It has distinct regional markets like the California market or the Reggie markets. There's also Washington cap and trade market. So they're all segregated in terms of different landscapes and regions, but it still does not have a nationalized market or even a carbon tax for that matter.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you, Ms. Agamani Ghosh. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll come back to other panelists. If you can take those questions and answer, if you already answered in the QA box, or if you want to answer in the audience right now, we can.
Sure.
Dr. Ashok Kumar. Mr. Rashmi has already left.
Yes, please.
So if you can take those questions from the chat box or QA box and answer.
Sure. I think, let me check. I think the first is related to the nuclear energy. Will the nuclear energy be a source of innovation for emission reduction? One broadly, the nuclear in India is a part of the non-fossil source of energy. So currently we are not very specific to nuclear, which project would be eligible or not eligible, but certainly you can say the bottom line statement is that any project that can establish the emission avoidance reduction and that can be quantified as per standards or the norms that the country or the internationally acceptable. So those all will be eligible in the market. So with that, I think just to stop the answering to this question. The other question is that 9 sectors have timeline fixed for the remaining sector. Yes, 9 sectors we have identified. Coming to the other sectors, we would plan as some, as I was saying, that some are currently under PAT scheme. They are under different cycles. They are carrying the PAT load. So once they graduate from PAT, so the call will be taken based on the suitability of those sectors coming into carbon market or remaining in the PAT scheme. So there are sectors which makes more sense to be in the PAT kind of a scheme than coming to the PAT scheme. So call will be taken. So as of now, we have identified only the 9 sectors. Rest we will coming at later stage. And how net zero is, there is a question, how net zero objectives are going to be achieved in a sense. Net zero 2070 timelines are being considered. That is looked at a very broad scale at NITI and to some extent at the Ministry of Finance. So based on their strategy and the broader framework sectorally, even the sectors like ministries like Ministry of Steel, they themselves on line ministry level, they are also looking at. So all put together, there will be kind of consolidated roadmap that is going to emerge. But currently, there are several, you can say, entities working on the 2070 timelines. Then, yes, on the CDM, it has been in the, I think, last COP that there was a decision or agreement that the credits that were issued, that was registered before 2013, were not those will not at all be used, but those registered after 2013 would be used for first NDC. So that is, I think, little bit of clarity on that. But however, I think later on, still things are yet to be firmed up. But that is the, you can say, to a large extent, the status of CDM credits, that how they are going to be used. And through the presentation, it was rolled out into edits. Yeah, I think I was saying that as per our current design is that the target for the 9 sectors or the start of CCTS will happen from the April of 2025. And normally, at least in the compliance market, our design is that 1 year of project implementation happens and then the verification. So April 26 onward, the verification process will happen. And if the verification takes around 4, 5, 6 months, so the some level of issuance that can take place in the process, and October, November would be the activity. I mean, I was saying that there would be movement in the carbon market, Indian carbon market. So the start would be as per current, you can say, plan is going to start from the April of 2025. So that clarity. And then, yes, academic institutions, again, if the academic institution can, mechanisms are developed, how those, building owners or the institutions can establish, there is a methodology, there is a verification, integrity, and all that are made for the performance that those institutions, hospitals, or polytechnics can make. So those credits, if they are credible enough to establish the avoidance of the emission that is equivalent to whatever quantity of carbon, those would be eligible for the for trading in the market or the offset market, the voluntary market. And then there is another. Yeah, as I think the previous presenter have mentioned about, there is in the carbon compliance market, there is a component of offset. So how about India? So India currently, we are contemplating on the under consideration. Discussion is on with that thought also, that can there be a window? How much will there be window, or will there be window or not? This is yet to be kind of firmed up. But yes, this discussion is there that there could be possibility of an offset window to the compliance market. So I think that is all for me. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Roshan Lal, are there any questions for you? Are you around if you have to answer?
Sir, he is not there, sir.
Okay, all right, fine. So now I then invite Professor K.K. Pant to give his concluding remarks and propose the vote of thanks. Professor Pant is the director of IIT Roorkee, and prior to that, he was Dean of Faculty at IIT Delhi. For his outstanding contribution to chemical engineering, he is recognized and has associated with several universities in different countries. He is member of several expert committees of Government of India, and he is also trustee of the Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust. So, Dr. Pant, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bang, for introducing me, and very good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank the chairman of LKMT, Mr. B.K. Chaturvedi, for introducing and giving the chairman address, followed by Mr. Alok Party and Professor R.K. Malhotra, who had been associated with the FIPI also. So I think it's a joint venture of Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust and the FIPI, who coordinated this entire webinar. And I'm really thankful to all the speakers. There were 4 speakers in this technical session. And briefly, I will give the overall the presentations and the theme which had been covered by each of the speakers. So the first of the speaker, Mr. Rasmi, he had very nicely explained about the carbon market pricing, and that was the theme which was set by Professor Malhotra and the chairman of LKMT. And very nicely, Mr. Rasmi covered the entire gamut of carbon trading and costing in terms of when you talk about the emission trading system and the carbon credit. He covered also informed about that 48 US dollar billion, $58 billion carbon market in terms of USD. That is the evolving carbon market, and which gives a kind of opportunity also to all the industries as well, the academic institutes and the business sectors. And this covers around 11.2 gigaton of the carbon dioxide, which is already being emitted into the environment. And so Dr. Rasmi has a vast experience in theory, and he has given the policies also which are being made by in the domestic carbon trading system and how carbon credits can be generated. He covered that part also. And he also just emphasized that carbon market under the Paris Agreement is an improvement over the Kyoto regime. And at the same time, he also addressed the challenges to the voluntarily carbon market. And a lot of things are to be done in this direction, where the government policies, market pricing, carbon market pricing, and way forward that he addressed. So thanks to Mr. Rasmi for delivering this talk and giving the entire gamut of the carbon market pricing. The next speaker was Mr. Roshan Lal, and from he's the ED and CEO of the ethanol business, and from Sriram. Very nicely he explained about again the policies for the carbon credit and carbon trading system in the agricultural and the industrial sector. And when you look at that, the carbon market in the agricultural sector, this is a kind of incentive also, green ammonia, fertilizer, biofertilizer. And he also emphasized on the improvement in the efficiency of the existing units, because the reduction in the unit operation, reduction in terms of the water management. So these are very, very important with the focus point which he addressed. And he also talked about the precision application of the fertilizer, because that is also very important when we look at how to reduce the carbon emission into the environment. The need of compressed biogas. So he also just talked in terms of that 1 ton of this compressed biogas can reduce around 500 tons of the emission, which is very, very important, I think. And how this water management and this the agriculture residue is being utilized in the sugar industry, that also he has focused on that. And that is also need of the hour when we talk about the waste minimization and water reuse into the system. I am sure that that will also help in terms of the reducing the carbon, and that is very important for the future. The partnership among the government, industries and communities, also he just emphasized on that point. So once again, I thank Mr. Roshan Lal for providing his thoughts on this, the usage of this the carbon credits in agriculture and the sugar industry. Our third speaker was Dr. Ashok Kumar from the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and he covered the development of Indian carbon market, the need of utilization of the sustainable development goals, and how to approach for the emission reduction. So innovative ways for the emission reduction, again, which also includes the how to improve the efficiency of the existing pumps units, and how to reduce the unit operations into the system, and utilization of the clean technology which in the process. Then he also focused on the emission trade schemes, which was also covered later by other speaker also, and carbon taxing, energy taxing, and carbon pricing index, and how these affect the entire, whether it is the emission trade system or carbon credit system. So how will it affect the overall the carbon dioxide reduction into the environment, which will evolution of the Indian carbon market, and the usage of these compliances, right, mechanism for the credit-based system. So very nicely he explained about the compliance mechanism, and that is also very important now, which should be implemented at different sectors. And the fourth speaker, Ms. Agmani Ghosh and Ms. Ashna Mishra, jointly very nicely from the, because belongs to the financial journalist, and very nicely they given the complete picture of the different organizations of the world, how they are adopting this emission trading system, ETS, versus the carbon taxing system. And what is important also, they focused on the importance of the ETS compared to the carbon taxing. They also focused on this, the energy transition, like carbon renewables, hydrogen and ammonia, and need of the biofuels into the traditional industries where the fossil feedstocks are being used. So that is also very important aspects. And they also talked about the benchmarkers model. Lot of discussions have been made in terms of the three different types of decarbonization in commodity sectors. They very nicely explained this part also. And also 6.2 versus 6.4 articles, which are generally used for this emission trading system and carbon taxing. So very nicely they explained the financial compliances of these two. And also they talked about the global compliance market and the emission trading system, which is more efficient method, because if the ETS is adopted, I am sure that that will reduce the entire the carbon and utilization of the fossil derived feedstocks. So very nicely both explained and given about the evidence credit versus removal credit. That is also very important for the reducing the carbon into the environment. So all these speakers have given very nicely the complete picture about the theme of this, which was the today's theme of this webinar, that how to get rid of the carbon dioxide from the environment, as well as how to look forward a kind of the carbon footprint, which can be helpful for the future in terms of carbon market and carbon trading. Just to conclude from my side in terms of the salient conclusions or recommendations, as I also just looking forward whatever the theme and how this can be covered for the future or way forward. So I observed that 95% of the fossil derived feed is right. Generally, industries are using 95% of this kind of fossil derived feedstock. Hydrogen, which is produced 95%, because when we talk about carbon dioxide utilization, hydrogen is very, very important. And this is costing 27 kg carbon dioxide per kg of the hydrogen. So if you look at on an average, the total, although now different norms, different governments have given different kind of norms, and zero carbon is little bit difficult as of today to implement. But when you talk about the electrolysis of water, that is a kind of the process when which can give a kind of zero carbon dioxide emission. But I think it will take time. When we talk about what should be done in terms of the future, I think a lot of R&D initiatives are required in this direction. So the supported projects which will reduce the carbon dioxide emission, that is important. Integration of carbon market into the sustainable strategies, that is also, I think, the policy should be made. And I'm sure that Bureau of Energy Efficiency, along with the other, right, MNRE and the Principal Scientific Advisor Office and several other government agencies will take lead in this direction. Then there are a couple of the, right, Paris assessment. When we talk about Article 6, it promotes the a kind of the, right, the carbon trading system. So carbon credits, carbon trading scheme, so which have also been discussed by all the speakers. And need of the reforestation is very, very important. So more and more plantation should be done. Utilization of the wetland areas, right, for restoration of soil carbon, sequestration, ETS and offset market. So that is also, I think, we need to work together to achieve these things. The zero waste discharge concept, again, as I was talking earlier also, and every speaker has stressed on that. So circular economy concept would be very, very important future. So we need to develop the process in such a way where the energy consumption in the process is minimized. So that is also very important. And so water conservation, energy conservation, and cleaner source of energy utilization would be, I think, very, very important for the future. Compressed biogas, already it has been talked. So I think that would be considered. The biomass to hydrogen, Professor Malhotra was also talking. So I think we need to look forward that the agriculture 240 billion ton of this kind of biomass is available. If that can be converted into hydrogen through different routes, so I think that will be again important. Then CO2 utilization, CO2 to sustainable aviation fuel, people are working at R&D level, but that is also very important. Carbon dioxide to methanol, dimethyl ether, but all these conversion methods will require the hydrogen. So the hydrogen at an economical price would also be very, very important to achieve this goal. So reduce the unit operation, as I said, miniaturization. So nuclear energy is also, because there was some question on that. Nuclear energy, I feel that if this can be utilized effectively, this will also be helpful to produce the green hydrogen at a lower price. So solar energy and then other hydro energy. So these are also cleaner source of energy which should be utilized in future. So I think that is also very, very important. So once again, I thank all the speakers for very nicely presenting their roles as far as the topic is concerned. And I also thank all the participants, those who spared their time and participated in the question and answer sessions. And I also once again thank Mr. Bang for coordinating this event very nicely, and all the other trustees of the Lovraj Kumar Memorial Trust and the Federation of Indian Petroleum Industry for joining this session. And last, not but the least, I will also like to thank Mr. Vishwakarma, who is behind this and had been actively engaged in all these activities, and all the other staff members of LKMT. So thank you very much for attending this meeting. Over to you, Mr. Bang.
Thank you. I think we started 10 minutes late and we are closing 10 minutes late. So I think it's a perfect time management, I would say. Thanks to all the speakers and all the participants. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you.